afternoon, and welcome to the first Lunch and Learn of 2014. I didn't think it would be quite this late in January when we started planning. And we're actually going to be talking about a continent right now that's a whole lot warmer than the one we're living on. I have to say that. And Dr. Byron Shaw is a Emeritus Professor from Stevens Point, and he's going to be talking about his safari in Africa. And we welcome him now.
All right, well, I'm glad to see so many people who got out and weathered this bitter cold conditions we have. A little nicer than it was 2 weeks ago, though, so I guess. Any rate, this trip that I did was last year in October, and it was a really very unbelievably good trip. You know, I've traveled a bit here and there, but this is probably a highlight of trips that I've done. So it was an exciting thing to do, and always kind of wanted to go to Africa, and my wife didn't. She doesn't want to ride around in a safari vehicle, and back troubles and whatnot. And another friend of mine, wife didn't want to go either, so we teamed up and went with another couple actually from Waupaca, Tom Wilson and his wife. Some of you may know Tom and Gingy. So they were with us on the trip as well. And we went 4 different countries in the southern part of Africa. I'll start running this through, I think. Okay, I think it's going.
Yes, it says pause.
Okay, at any rate, most of the time was in different national parks in different countries. We're in Botswana, 2 different parks there. That's we're trying to pause and figure out when to pause and when not to. This is going to be a bit of a problem. And Botswana is really a very neat country, and it's got a lot of national parks and a very well-managed wildlife program. And we spent time in, I'm going to have a problem. I got to figure out how I can pause this easier. I'm going to stand over here. I don't want to block the screen either. I think I can pause with the space bar.
Yeah, that's the play. So we're going to have to hit that thing right there.
Okay.
Right there.
So there's now a keystroke on here.
I think if you have the button right there, if you just hit this one, it'll start it and stop it. Yep. Yep.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So if we keep the mouse, there we go. Okay. And then, so when you have that, when you see the pause, it's going to be stopped.
Okay. Okay.
No, pause. You want to, there you go. When you see play, it stops. You push it to play. Okay.
All right. I'll get this figured out yet. What's that? Yeah, I think I can.
Is your PhD in audiovisual?
No, not even close.
Why don't I just stay right up here with you, Byron, and we'll work it through.
I think it's playing. Now if I can hit the pause.
Playing.
No, it's not.
Go to there to pause.
All right.
Now if we
I think
hit it.
Yeah, now I just hit the pause there.
Okay, now it's paused. When you push it again, it's
Okay.
playing. So now, pause.
All
Got it.
right, I'll get there. Okay, and anyway, what we did on the trip was spending about 4 days at each of these camps, and these were pretty remote camps where we generally had to fly into with small airplanes and then take these Land Rover vehicles to get into the camp. And a lot of it was on back roads and pretty remote areas, which was very nice. You know, this wasn't traveling around in big tour buses and things. This was going in pretty wild areas. We had the camps. There was a group of only 12 people, and that's one of the advantages. The company we traveled with is called Overseas Adventure Travel, and I've got some of their brochure stuff in the back there that you may want to look at. But they kind of specialize in having groups of 16 people or less. so you don't end up with, a big tour bus. And so it was really a very neat trip. Each camp we were at, we had like 17 different people working there taking care of 12 of us. I mean, it was, we were well taken care of. We were fed well, we had good guides, good facilities, good cleanliness, and nobody got sick on the whole trip. It was a 17-day trip. So, it was really well done, a well-done company. So we started out in Botswana. Well, actually, we flew into Johannesburg, went from Johannesburg and flew up to Botswana, actually to Zimbabwe right away at Victoria Falls, at the town where we landed, and then drove into Botswana the first day, and that's where some of the pictures initially there were. And we were at first 4 days at the Chobe National Park, and then we flew from there to this Okavango Delta, and then flew from there to this Kafawe National Park in Zambia, and then came back to Victoria Falls, and then flew out to this Wangi National Park, which is in Zimbabwe. And then from there, we went back to Johannesburg. Well, actually, we had 2 nights in Victoria Falls before we went back to Johannesburg, and then spent 1 day in Johannesburg. So it was, we saw a lot of places, did a lot of things, and we were very fortunate. We saw a lot of wildlife, probably more than most trips have seen there. So the guides are telling us we were very lucky in seeing and having the experience as well as we did. I think we're going now. So some of this may go through fairly fast, and that's part of the area we were in Africa. The southern part, all of it just north of South Africa. All these countries are in the southern tier of countries in Africa. And this is Botswana, which has a lot of natural areas in it. We were there right at the end of the dry season, which is a very dry period of time, and it was just beginning to get into the rainy season toward the end of October. This lodge that we were at, this was actually a private, outside of the national park was a private camp. And every time we got into a camp, we got a welcoming committee show up, and every time we came back into camp after being out for several hours, they'd be there with wet towels so we could dry off and get cooled down. And really well taken care of. This is a view of the river. Yeah. That's a little swimming pool at the camp as well. So we had, facilities that weren't too terrible. This is the river that actually is the boundary between Botswana and rain freeze all of a sudden. All right, where? Zimbabwe? No, not Zimbabwe. Why can't I think of that? See it on here, but they don't have a name. Namibia. At any rate, we weren't in there at all, other than being across the river. It was a very wide floodplain. Of course, the water there is what attracts the wildlife during the dry season. So there's a lot of wildlife accumulates along these wet areas, and that's what makes for very good wildlife viewing during the dry season. About a month later, when during the rainy season, the wildlife disperses out into the countryside, and you don't see near as much wildlife as you would in this dry period. And we had baboons right around our camp. In fact, there'd been a baboon in one of the cabins the day before we got there. A very large herds of wildlife that you'll see in these Cape buffalo. We're coming out of that dry area and moving up into out into feed during the daytime, out into the drier areas. And they were crossing. This is the only blacktop road we saw on the whole trip. Actually, it was the one going to this camp in Botswana. Yeah, there was a lot of animals there, and they were blocking traffic for a little while on the road. There's several thousand of them. I'm not sure just how many there were altogether. Yeah, this is a kudu. This is really an attractive antelope. And some of the bird life there is just spectacular. I mean, This is another hornbill, yellow-beaked hornbill. And the advantage in this trip was this camera that I was using. It's not that big of a camera, but it's got like a 30-power zoom on it, so it really does a great job for taking wildlife pictures. And this is right along the river again. You can see on the other side in Namibia, there are some private residences over there, and the other side from the national park that we were in Botswana. But large groupings of zebras and giraffes. And the giraffe are really an impressive animal, and we're seeing, as you'll see in a couple of minutes, where they were actually kind of must have been into their mating season, so some of the males were sparring a little bit. Long eyelashes on. No, that's one's, I think, not a full-grown, but a medium size. It did have there's some younger ones there with some older ones. Yeah, some of the video with the sound, just a little wind noise. Now this was what I was talking about. That's the way they exert dominance or try to figure out who's going to be the breeding male in the group. And the one on the right there actually kind of just stood there and took some beating for a while. It seemed kind of a strange behavior. That you could see that they got pretty big horns on their head. You can see those, and those long necks when they get swinging them around can do some damage. I guess they do some serious damage sometimes to one another. But I did with that pointer. Yeah, there's a lot of impalas, and most of the impalas we are seeing are the females and young ones, not as many males, and they tend to group up, and it seems like there's a big population of impalas in that part of Africa. And they're a favorite food of a lot of the cats, but they seem to be surviving quite well in spite of a fairly good population in reality. Yeah, and the zebras are doing the same thing. They were having some little battles going on now and then. You watch that one to be kicking and biting at each other. Then we came across this guy and his girlfriend. Yeah, he looks pretty regal there. Well, it's amazing. They could drive these vehicles up within 50 feet of these animals, and they just sat there and they totally ignored us. Yeah, and she was not too far away. They were obviously a mating pair. And we did see quite a few lions on this trip overall. Not as many in this particular park as we did elsewhere, but eventually. Yeah, you can hear another one of the vehicles. There were two vehicles there at the time. We didn't have big crowds of vehicles. Yeah, he put it on a show for us. Yeah, look at those teeth on that guy. Yeah, and immediately the female rolls over on her back to allow the sperm, I guess, to get spread in, so that makes sure that it gets in contact with the egg. So it's I guess a very common practice after they breed. And they do breed like every 20 minutes or so, I guess. So it's they go on for days like that. So, yeah, but we were not very far away. I mean, even with this telephoto lens, came down a little further, and this pack of wild dogs, they're becoming quite rare, I guess, in a lot of different areas in Africa. They're having a lot of problems. We were very fortunate to see these, and there again, they actually drove off the road back through the bush to get within about, certainly less than 100 feet from this whole pack of dogs. And why they were like these bigger ones picking on these pups down there. I don't know. They were like trying to get them up and going or something. I'm not sure. The guys didn't seem to know what that behavior was all about either. There was. I guess that's just the way they are. I think you're probably right. Yeah, no, those are the vehicles that we were traveling in and what a lot of the roads were like. So you didn't have a real smooth ride very often, but they were very, very safe, very good vehicles. We only had 6 people in a vehicle, so everybody had a window seat, so to speak, and 3 tiers. So, yeah, this is one of those Cape Buffaloes right along the road. I mean, we weren't 10 feet away from this guy when he drove by him. He would just totally ignored us. It's a kind of thing that's amazing how much the wildlife just ignores your presence. And you can get up really close to a lot of these wild animals. Of course, no hunting. Well, that one well, at any rate, I should have paused that one. That was a whole group of elephants. They had a young one that they were surrounding, a kind of a protective circle around it. And this is, oops, I thought I paused. What did I do? Oh, I don't have the pointer in the right. Well, I think I paused it on this eagle. But, every day, usually we came back in around 11 o'clock. Usually they stopped. We went out early in the morning. Came back in around 11 o'clock, but we'd have a tea time between then. We'd have a stop somewhere where they'd get out coffee and cookies and stuff before we came back into camp, and then we'd eat lunch around noon. They had a siesta until like 3 o'clock, because it's very hot in the middle of the day there. It was in the 90s every day that time of year, so it gets quite hot. But they fed us, then a meal at noon, and then they'd have an educational program like at between 2 and 3 o'clock. And that's where that woman that was there showing basket weaving. Why I'm not getting used to that. Yeah, now I'm too far back. There is a lot of elephants in Botswana. They actually have a problem with too many elephants. They've pretty much destroyed all their food supply and their range. And particularly during the dry season when they all congregate in these wetter areas. So they're having a real dilemma where a lot of other countries in Africa have a real problem with elephants being poached and really the population under stress. Botswana has a surplus. And they're trying to figure out how to cut their population because there's international bans on harvesting any elephants. So they can't shoot them. They can't, they're trying to figure out how they can sterilize elephants so they don't reproduce as much. And it's kind of a dilemma that they have, which is maybe a nice dilemma to have compared to having too few. And there were, all sizes of elephants. We had, is that going again? No. Why did I do that?
Oh, that's a beauty.
Yeah. No. Very quick. All right. There's the lady that's showing us how they. I think I'm on pause again. They do some really nice basket work. And there's one of those baskets on the back table that I bought Margaret. Actually, the woman's name was, my wife's name is Margaret, and the woman that made it was Margaret. So it was a good occasion to take a picture of her with a basket work. They do some very nice craft work and a lot of carvings and some other stuff on the back table, a lot of stuff that I did bring back that were amazingly cheap that, you can get some really nice work from some of these people. I'm a wood carver myself, so I appreciate some of the woodworking things that these people do. going again? Oh, there we go. Okay. You have to struggle along with me on this machine. But the wildlife and the bird life was just spectacular. We'd be driving along, and this wasn't, the guides were more into the big animals. They weren't always stopping for birds. Some of us like to take pictures of birds as well, a little more. But this was actually right at the camp. That little group of elephants. I got some other pictures later on of some baby elephants that were really pretty neat. But you can see how open the country is there, and it's a pretty dry area. And actually, I think this particular movie, I think, is out of order. Actually, I think this is in Zimbabwe. This isn't in Botswana. Okay, and then we're going from that first camp, we flew into the Okavango Delta, which is a huge delta. It's a huge inland area where it has no outlet to rivers out to the ocean at all. It's just like Great Salt Lake. It's kind of all the water drains in there, but there's no outlet. And it's and shortly after getting off the airplane, we drove in, and there was this leopard up in a tree, and he had an impala. You can see the hooves here. He had killed and dragged this impala up into the tree, and did I pause it or not? Yeah, I did. How about that? And you can see he's got a collar on it as well. We found a lot of the wild cats there. They're doing a lot of research, so there's a lot of them that do have radio collars on them. And this one did. He actually had a female with him, but she took off. She didn't want to stick around and get pictures taken. He wasn't real happy about that either. What did I do?
You didn't back up.
No. Okay. I must have got, okay, there's a picture of the Okavango Delta. It's a big area, and we're in just a very small part of it. And there's a lot of wildlife camps. In fact, there's a lot of camps there that people can hunt as well, so they do harvest wildlife in some of these areas. We were in a group, and everywhere we were at, there wasn't any hunting allowed within, a fair distance at any rate, So we had wildlife that wasn't hunted, and it was therefore, pretty not wild, they were used to people not shooting at them. All right, this is that leopard coming out of the tree, and he was up there for a little while and came down, and a little while later he was actually laying down there on the ground. Just amazing, we could drive up quite close to him. This is how he came within about 2 feet of our vehicle. I mean, he came down, and a friend of mine, Tom Wilson, was sitting on the right at that time, and just kind of looked up at him and sneered at him. It was kind of a little bit scary. But this was a camp that we went to there. This is a tent, but well-constructed tent. But they require use of tents within the national parks because they can be taken, they can be moved. They don't allow any permanent structures. So this is a Cape Buffalo that we can see right out our porch, and some elephants right off of our porch. And at that camp, we had lions. We know at night because we heard them real close to where our tents were. So these are elevated. I don't know if you notice that in the picture before, the walkways are all elevated, and so were the structures, so wildlife could actually pass underneath. This was a spectacular show too. This group of zebras running across this pond. This was toward evening. They took us to a spot for wildlife viewing toward evening and the sunset. And this one was moving a little bit slow across there. So off to the right there was these zebras, and off to the left, as the sun was going down, a whole group of elephants came up to water in that same body of water that we'd driven up to. So they were there getting their water for the day. And we had a beautiful sunset to go along with it. So, it was pretty nice. And they got out their beverages. You could have wine or beer or pop or coffee or tea or whatever you chose. The alcoholic stuff you had to pay extra for, but everything else was provided on the tour. And this was back the other direction toward where the zebras were. And I did take some panoramic shots trying to get both ends of this to show up. And that was the sunset that we had just shortly after that. So often they'd stay out until sunset wherever we were, and then often on the way back they'd actually use a spotlight to see if you could spot any other animals that are just coming out in the evenings. Yeah, that's where, you're having our beverages. A fairly nice sunset. Yeah, that's another shot of those elephants who are at the other end of that. Sometimes these are pausing longer than I want, and other times they're going through there too fast. My movie-making skills would have a lot to be desired, but
We like your pause.
yeah, and there's some of the bird life there. There's a lot of storks and cranes, and this is actually one of the storks. I forget, saddle-billed stork, I believe. And this little pockets of water, and there'd be ducks and geese and storks and a wide range of bird life that we didn't have a lot of time to actually sit there and take pictures and identify them. But this was a dugout canoe trip. Actually, those are made out of fiberglass, but then like the dugout canoes, the trees they make them out are getting quite scarce, so it's against the law now to make new dugout canoes. So they're using fiberglass. Pretty narrow, felt like pretty tippy things, but these guys pulled them through there pretty gently up this little river. And we got up toward the end of it, and there was a big old elephant up there, and then there were some hippos that were, so we didn't necessarily want to go any further anyway. This was kind of the end of a channel. So we were pulled in on shore and were able to just watch the wildlife there for a while. And it was another one of these really gorgeous places. There was a whole family of hippos in there. And this is an old elephant. They figured, and he's in there eating because most of these elephants feed largely on woody vegetation. They're chewing up limbs and stuff that's quite large, but when they get really old, they don't have any teeth left, and they can't chew on that stuff anymore. So they kind of focus in on the water where they can eat aquatic vegetation, things that they can just kind of gum up and eat rather than chewing on woody stuff. It's amazing, the twigs and the woody material that they eat, and the wood chips that they actually have coming through in their elephant dung are amazing. They process a lot of very coarse vegetation. Part of it is because they've eaten up all the good stuff. All they have left is woody stuff in a lot of areas. And you can hear our guides, and the guides did a really good job trying to talk about the culture and, whatever questions we had, but they did do a nice job trying to teach us quite a bit about the culture of the area. This was that panoramic shot I was talking about, that trying to cover the whole channel that we had paddled up along. Most of the days were sunny. It was really very nice, and it was warm, it was hot, but we were still in the dry season, so we didn't have to worry much about rain. And we didn't have to worry much about bugs. There was very few insects that time of year because it was still quite dry. And water lilies, similar to ours, and not the same species, I'm sure. And this is a little plant that actually gets a bulb of water there, and they use that as a squirt gun. And kids will take and pick these, and you can squirt that thing out. It makes quite a stream of water going out of the little flower at the end. An umbrella tree. Yeah, and this is a little springbok cute little deer, quite small, but we did see quite a few of them. They're kind of shy, and they're usually solitary. You only see one or two together, not big herds of them like you see with the impalas. And there was a dingo, yeah, an ostrich. Why can't I think of the right name for that? Jackal, there we go, yeah. This was a lion track that was in the road very close to our camp. There had been a pair of male lions around the night before. And so they decided to track these with these Land Rovers and try to track them cross country. And this was a local woman that was on the part of the tribe that actually owns that land that we were on at that particular point in this Okavango Delta. She was a better tracker than our other guides. She'd get out and figure out where these, and then we came across this cheetah, which, well, we got somehow, I don't know how they communicate. How they, in our vehicle, they got on the radio from somebody that said there was a cheetah in some area. And so he drove around all for half an hour trying to find this cheetah, and eventually found it. And how somebody else knew it was there, or how he got a tip that this cheetah and one cub were out there. But it was a pretty neat experience to drive up pretty close to it, and this poor little thing was there trying to figure out what we were all about. But again, we could drive fairly close without spooking the animal. She eventually did get nervous and got up and left from under that shade tree that she was at. But you can see she had a collar on her too. And they often have 2 or 3 cubs. She probably did, but this is the only surviving one. I guess leopards and lions are very hard on cheetahs. So this we came across, and later when we were tracking those 2 lions, this was the pride of females and cubs that these 2 males had been traveling with. And there was the two guys that we'd been trying to track all morning, and they were just a little ways away from where that group of others were. And before we left all the camps, we had one party in the evening where the local people would put on some dancing and singing and always get us involved a little bit as well. So they did really a very nice job of trying to teach us a bit about their culture and their dance and their songs. This is the kind of aircraft, for the most part, that we were traveling from one camp to another in. This was we were crossing over the Zimbabwe, going into Zambia. This is in Victoria. And some of the outdoor markets. Amazing the number of hardware and everything else they'd have in just outdoor markets like that. Did I hit one? No. Okay. Yeah, crossing the Zambezi River. The Zambezi River is where the Victoria Falls is on. And so we were just upriver from that some where we crossed over, and later on when we came back, we did spend a couple days at the falls. But there's only one bridge going across, and the traffic was lined up for miles behind it, and semis and things going back and forth between Zimbabwe and Zambia. So we flew in, and this is the camp that we actually went to is down there where these 2 rivers converge. And on our way back to the camp on the vehicles and after the airstrip, we came across these water buck, and there was a whole group of 4 young lions that were hiding behind a bank. They were eyeing up these water buck, and we were able to get in quite close to them. They were thinking they were going to tackle those. Their mother was laying off to the side about 50 feet away, just kind of ignoring them. Yeah, that's our welcoming committee when we got to camp. And you notice there's one white woman there, the only woman in camp, you know, and all the other camps there was a lot more native women involved. But she was a manager. She and her husband were managers of that particular camp. This was in Zambia, and I guess that's the tradition in Zambia more, that these women are not participating in these kind of tourist operations, and I'm not sure the whole reason for that. Our camp was right on a river. You know, it had a very nice deck and a view out over where we're eating area. This was a hippo right underneath our cabin, where our tent actually, where we were at. They'd come out at night and be up there feeding at nighttime, and then go back in the water in the morning. We spent some time on the river, and had crocodiles in the river, along with hippos, and not a place I think I'd want to be swimming, but it was there's a pretty good sized herd of hippos in that river where we were at, and elephants were crossing the river. We saw a lot of wildlife on the river itself. And we did a little bit of fishing. Didn't catch anything really big, but we caught some things. Everything we caught they called a tilapia, even though they didn't all look alike, so I'm not sure exactly what we were catching. But it was fun. You know, we went out and we went out. Some of us went out in the fishing boat. The others went out in the sightseeing boat. And the ones who went in the fishing boat saw a lot more wildlife than the ones who went out of the wildlife viewing boat. So we did. These are a couple elephants, couple adolescents, I guess, boy elephants that were sparring out in the middle of the river, and they were having a great time. I guess it wasn't a serious fight, but they, yeah, they were. Yeah, they were just crossing the river and decided, I guess, to play around on their way across. This is a whole group of hippos that were going out. They were actually coming back from feeding at night out in the upland areas and heading back into the river during the daytime, which is pretty much what they do. Their skin is very sensitive to the sun, so during the daylight hours they spend their time underwater virtually, you know, so they're protecting themselves from the sun pretty well. And there's a couple crocodiles out there along with them. I guess more people are actually killed by crocodiles than any other animal in Africa. I mean by hippopotamuses than any other animal. They're actually a fairly dangerous critter. If you look at the size of their teeth, they open their mouth, and powerful animal and large jaws. That's something you want to tangle with. Yeah, I thought I had one with his mouth wide open, but yeah, and then we had another day, another call, and somebody said there were these cheetahs had shown up on the airstrip actually where we had landed. So they diverted and went to the airstrip, and sure enough, there were 3 cheetahs up there that they hadn't seen them for like 2 months or 3 months, and all of a sudden they were back in the area. And so we were fortunate to get there at the right time, and ended up getting some nice pictures of some cheetahs. They didn't have any young with them. And they did have radio collars on. I don't remember at least one of them. But you can see they're a very streamlined animal. What's that?
Can they track them with that so you can go find them?
Well, they claim that they don't. The researchers are not supposed to give this information to the guides. You know, they're supposed to be trying to keep these things natural and not be using those as a tracking device for the safari operators. Didn't like that bird sitting on his back. We got an area. There's a lot of female and very young impalas. Really quite young ones, and they're pretty vulnerable, and you got all these wild cats roaming that area. But it seems like the population is doing quite well in spite of a lot of wildlife. Almost. Yeah, there were no males with this whole group, and that seemed to be pretty typical that there weren't any of the males that do have horns. And that was a stop. In this area, there's on the bumper, there's a little holder there that they put elephant dung in, and light this on fire so it smokes. So you're getting a smoke screen as you drive, because there's a lot of tsetse flies in that area. And so they're trying to keep the flies away from us. Apparently they're not the variety that causes any serious illness, but they're another use for elephant dung, other than a stool that had 4 of them stacked up to show us an alternative use for the... There's one of those tsetse flies. But they do bite, we got bit by them, not a lot, and they didn't, cause any serious problems to anybody, but they're there. This was, again, one of our midday breaks, so they had a local woman come in, actually from an adjoining camp, and show us how they use their fabric, one piece of fabric, and Margaret's got one on the table back there that I brought back, and they'll use that same fabric for all kinds of uses. They'll use it to make a thing to put on their head for carrying water jugs, they'll use it to make a baby carrier, they use it for their skirt and their blouse, they can take one piece of fabric, and it's all they need to own is a couple of those, and they've got a whole wardrobe, and a multi-purpose fabric. Is it going? Yeah. I guess I paused on here long. There again was our last night in camp where they had again, everybody around the campfire dancing. And they usually cooked that last meal over an open fire as well. And we were fed really well. I mean, we had amazingly good meals on the whole trip. The chef would usually come out in the evening meal and announce what the menu was. I mean, kind of for being out in the middle of the bush, it was pretty classical. All right, then we left Zambia and we're heading to Zimbabwe for the last camp that we were at. And Zimbabwe is the poorest country of all of them that we were in. Zimbabwe's had a lot of problems with politics. This is the fire department at the airport, by the way. This is a couple buckets of sand and some swatters. So that was at the airstrip that we were leaving from. And this is getting into Victoria Falls, and there's some rafters down below. There's some rafting, a lot of rafting in that area. It's a more developed area. And Zambezi, Zimbabwe's own beer, so we had to sample that on as well. That was probably the main beer that they had. And we got into the camp, and here was an elephant that had been recently killed, probably the night before. And you can see there's some other lions behind, but the males get to eat first. The females have killed the elephant, and it was probably a 6 or 7 year old elephant. They figured a fairly decent size, and how they managed to bring that down to kill it, we're not sure. But there was a whole group of like 22 lions in this pride that were, and these 2 males were having all they could stomach. And they were so tired after that, they wandered off, and then everybody else got their turn to come in and chew on it. And there was one female there that had 5 cubs. I mean, it was pretty unusual. She had And she had another female that actually was helping her take care of those. They were traveling together, I guess like a surrogate mother kind of thing. So it was and so the cubs were having a lot of fun around there, and they got to get in and chew on meat and chew on somebody else's tail. This one was thought that tail might be fun to chew on. So it was. You can see there was a pretty large group of lions, one chewing away on a chunk of meat there. It's amazing, an elephant that size, by the next morning it was gone. I mean, it was, the only thing that was left was the vultures were there cleaning up the bones. And probably within a few days after that, the hyenas will come and eat the bones. I mean, it's a very tight food web system. You got that many lions, amazing. They can put away an elephant in a day without any trouble, and they dispersed out. You know, they left obviously once there was no meat left, and well, they still stay together as a pride for the most part. But we saw that same female the next day with those 5 cubs in another area, and another female was with her. But they hadn't, I don't think, had gone too far away from the main group. Although there was another male and female here. There was one female who was an estrus and was, even when we were there. This was the sunset at that same spot that evening. And there's a water hole actually right across the road. In Zimbabwe, in this national park, there is no natural water during the dry season, so they've actually put in pumps. And this was a mother trying to get a baby elephant. These lions were right across the road. I mean, they were, very close by, and she was trying to usher that guy along to get him to the safety of the other group of elephants that were up by the water hole. So they I don't know why they were out by themselves some distance away, and she was kind of almost pushing him with her trunk to try to get this little guy to get up there before those lions took an interest. And and that's the vultures on the carcass the next day. They were sitting around waiting. They were up in the trees and whatnot, waiting for everybody to. They get in there. Yeah, and this was the mother with these cubs, the next morning in a different, I think that same morning that we saw the vultures there. And they had moved off somewhere else. And she had a collar on her. And that's the other 3. So they're all 5 of them together. And there's some minerals in that soil that they were licking up. And, there's kind of like a mineral lick. And there's some places like that where these animals do kind of tend to congregate to get some minerals in their diet. He's got a pretty full belly on that one as well. And this was the camp that we were at in this place in Zimbabwe. It's a fairly open, dry area. There's a water hole here, which again was being fed by a pump. And they actually have diesel engine pumps that are feeding these water holes in this national park. There's about a half a dozen water holes that are being fed so that they maintain. Otherwise, these wildlife would all leave and have to go somewhere where there's water. And they had a nice little swimming pool there as well. That was our guide. That's Gingy Wilson. I don't know, some of you may know her. That's the only gun we saw on the whole trip. The only guide that ever had a gun. And here we were around all these lions and everything else, and nobody ever. This is all the handiwork actually of the guides at that camp. They had a little shop, and I did buy a couple things from them as well. Nice motherly picture. Well, they seem quite content and quite well fed, and there she is with all 5 of them. The termite mounds, and a lot of the ecology of termites and termite mounds, there's a real basis to a lot of the food chain and even to a lot of the housing and the way natives utilize areas where there have been a lot of termite mounds for building their houses. And they were leaving the national park and going off. The only day that we were outside, leaving and going to a local village and local school that was partly supported by this company that we were traveling with. They've actually drilled a well for the local people and help support the school system that they have there. And this is kind of what they have for their shelters for keeping their livestock in the evening. This was a local store, and unfortunately, I didn't get very good pictures inside the store, but this is now the supermarket. Very few things that they have, and they encouraged us to buy some things at the store to take to the village that we are going to go visit later, so we could, donate some things. This is a new house being built with a thatched roof, and there's a lady with that fabric building her child carrier. They seem very happy. The people, for having very little and virtually nothing, always seem to be quite content and quite happy. The women collect the material for the roofing. It's all bundles of material that are being brought in to rethatch the roofs on their houses. That's the well. There's nothing electric or diesel engine. It's just a hand pump. So they got a well and a plunger, and so the local people, there's nothing to go wrong. You can pump water, and they all show up with their 5-gallon buckets from, I don't know from how big an area that one well is providing water, but a fairly significant area. And their livestock didn't look too plump, but during the dry season, I'm sure there's not an awful lot of good feed around. They all had cowbells. And the men would take the cattle out during the daytime, out to feed in the surrounding areas, bring them back into their little barricade areas at night. And a lot of these kids they all walk to school. They don't have any school buses, and they walk, many of them, miles to get to school every day. And they put on quite a show for us, since the company does help support the school, so the teachers there are making sure that these kids put on a good show, so they get more donations from the tourists that come there and their kids are all extremely several different classrooms are putting on dances and singing for the group. And we were there, just before lunchtime, so we got to see what their hot lunch program looks like. And there's the hot lunch program, a wood fire with a kettle, one kettle with, it looked like beans, and the other one with some corn mash. And the kids get in line with their plates, and they go through there, and they get a glop of this and a glop of that, and then they go sit under a tree and eat it. And, that was too bad. That was really a neat. Sometimes these have gone too fast. this was after school. We came back, and these girls were walking home along this road, probably about a mile away from the school. And that was their jungle gym or whatever, and they were just having a great time, swinging up and down on that. These kids don't have all the electronic gadgets and everything that our kids have. And in fact, we were there meeting with them. I have the one video on the camera here of these elephants crossing the river. And these girls were so enthralled with that. They crowded around, and they called their friends over, come over, see this, see this. They live in these areas that are adjacent to national parks, but they really never get to see the wildlife that is, part of their heritage and part of their own national park. So it's kind of a very interesting. But the kids always seem to be, very happy, even though they don't have a whole lot.
Are their uniforms color-coded by class or school?
No, these by school. Yeah, they all wear the same color. And this is really a gorgeous bird. Gray-crested crane, I think is what it's called. And there was a pair of them that were on our way back to camp after visiting the schools. It was a very windy day, as you can kind of see from the way their feathers are getting blown around. Trying to find something to eat out of that elephant dung is what they're doing. They're picking away at some of the... And this is a bird called secretary bird, fairly long-legged. Another gorgeous bird. They flew down onto the ground while we were there, and they were very unique. And then we came back toward camp, and there's these water buck, and you can see that the male on the left is very interested in that female. This must have been the rutting season as well. We didn't realize at the time that just around the bend about, less than 50 yards away, there was a leopard who was also watching these water buck. I think was probably waiting for that male to mount the female or something. But he had an advantage. But as you see in a moment, we kind of startled the leopard. And she just went and laid under a bush and just sat there and waited till we went away. And wasn't too happy, I don't think, about us interrupting her hunt. But then that was a great opportunity for us to get some close-ups of a leopard. This is only probably a couple hundred yards from where our camp was. And this was another pair of lions that obviously this guy was kind of more interested than she was at this particular point. It's kind of we drove in fairly close to these two. These were amazing how close you could drive, and they just totally ignored us. You'll see in a minute, they walked when they got up. He says, not now. Yeah, they stop and look at us, but they, for the most part, just ignored the vehicles and the people. Not really, they told us just to sit still, don't stand up, and don't talk, So if you start moving around, then they might decide they need to do something about it. It's just, they have never had a problem, and they don't even carry guns in their safari vehicles, which is kind of surprising. You think you might need some protection.
Like a deer here, that the deer walk down the street and you have to stop going across the street.
Yeah, just about. That's a tortoise, very pretty. And those actually get quite large. This is a roan antelope. It's the only one we saw on the whole trip. Okay, and then we flew back to Victoria Falls, which is, we stayed in a really luxurious lodge there. Had, again, very good food and lodging and very nice facilities. If we just let, there's a view off of their deck. They've got a water hole down below that has all kinds of wildlife. Had elephants that were coming in there early in the morning. And a lot of bird life. But they were taking their table scraps and stuff and putting them down there, so all the vultures and everything were coming in there by large populations when they were doing that. They had some warthogs. We saw a lot of warthogs. That's the only picture I put in. But they were right on the grounds of that hotel. And that one was in about 10 feet of me. I wasn't sure if I was very safe or not. This was at the airport. Not actually, it was a local store, a high-end store. You can buy anything there. Most of it you couldn't bring back to the country, but the craft work and things, yeah, that's Victoria Falls. It's a gorgeous falls. This is during the dry season, so it's got the least water it would ever have. But still, it's a lot of water, a lot of mist. Very pretty place to be. I guess during the rainy season, there's so much water and so much mist, you can't see anything, because it's just it's such a fog in the air. So it's much more difficult to actually see the falls. It's a narrow gorge, so you really can't see the whole thing. It stretches for over a mile. And this was a deer that was right down there and where the mist was and lots of green vegetation and a little bit of wildlife right along the edge of it. We had one extra day at the end, which turned out to be fortunate. So we actually did a tour of Johannesburg. And this was a store in Johannesburg that sold all kinds of stuff as well. They took us to kind of a touristy part of the town. And then we went out to Soweto and got to see the home of Mandela and the museum. That's a famous soccer stadium in Johannesburg. And it was kind of the finale to our trip. And there's vendors selling a lot of wares and whatnot up there near the museum and the Apartheid Museum. Mandela Family Restaurant. I guess they were in the restaurant business at one time. And this is a part of Soweto with some of the poor areas. Most of it actually the South African government's giving fairly decent homes to most of the poor people there in that area, although there's still a lot of fairly slummy areas, very poor people. But there are a couple old cooling towers. Now there's a bungee jump going off the thing in between those two cooling towers. I'm not sure why. This was at the airport. Again, you could buy some skins of various critters and bring them home if you wanted to. And I just took a few slides in the end. Some of them are that one wasn't the most focused. And there's a big termite mound there, these. And there's a lot of big termite mounds in that whole area. And I didn't talk a lot about that. And these are some bee eaters that are really another gorgeous bird that I hadn't included in there earlier. Big old lion. And this is a fish eagle. We saw quite a few of those in the areas along where there was water. And a Cory bustard, another one of their birds that's one of the vultures, white-headed vulture, and the jackal, which I couldn't think of the name before. But he was laying right in the road, and we almost stopped the vehicle. He didn't seem to be too afraid of us.
Were those notches in that deer's ear man-made, or was that some way to mark them for something, or not so much?
I don't know. That's a good question. I think that's it. Yeah, one thing in Zimbabwe, a lot of the stuff on the back row there is some things that I bought there as gift items. They do some marvelous carvings, and a lot of their carvings depict what they call the Big Five, which is the five big animals that everybody wants to see when they go to Africa. And we saw 4 of the 5. We did not see any rhinoceros. They're so scarce in the countries we are in that what few they have virtually protected in walled-in areas to protect them from poachers. which is really sad because they're, you know, a marvelous animal. But we didn't. We could have done one side tour, you know, and gone to see a rhinoceros in captivity, but we didn't opt to spend the extra money to do that just so we could check it off of our list. But again, bartering for a lot of the stuff on the back shelf, a lot of those carvings and stuff in Zimbabwe, in Victoria Falls, they love to barter. It's amazing. If you have something, I had a little thermos that I carry with me all the time to have my coffee along. And they really wanted that. And I bartered that for a really neat carving back there. Actually, maybe I should just hold that up because they do a lot of their work is out of wood, but they do a lot of stone as well. And, you know, this is actually a soapstone carving, you know, 2 giraffes and a baby giraffe, you know. So they traded that for what would be equivalent of maybe a $10 little thermos, you know, that was well used and beat up. they really wanted my thermos, so I got rid of it. And this I bought from a guy, we were crossing the bridge, a young man who claimed that he had carved this himself out of ironwood, a very dense, very hard wood. And it's very nice carving, very nice work, you know. And I think maybe I gave him $10 or something for this, you know, which is amazingly inexpensive.
Byron, American dollars?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, most of them won't take American dollars at these kind of places. It's pretty hard to change money in Zimbabwe. We actually bought some. I didn't bring it. I guess I give those to the grandkids, but $10 million bills, you know, and their money was so devalued that they were printing these things up in tens of millions of dollars per note that you could buy now as souvenirs, because they're totally useless. Again, one of our guides had carved this leopard coming out of a tree as well, out of stone, you know, and it was really very well done. I think I paid him $20 for that one, and that broke in my suitcase on the way home. So. It's a pretty, yeah, and unfortunately a couple other people that had bought some of these soapstone carvings had the same, because it's a pretty soft stone. Now I had it, I thought, protected really well, but at any rate, not well enough. So it was kind of a fun, that was the only real shopping thing we did on the whole trip for that. It was a lot of neat souvenirs, and this was a basket that, you know, that woman had made. So. And this is one of their pieces of fabric that they use a lot. So anybody wants to look at any of this stuff back here, feel free to
And
do so.
Byron will stick around for questions, and
Sure.
otherwise this ends our program. Thank you so much for coming. We do have another one the 11th of February, and that one is about turtle rescue, and it's one of our local librarians who participated in a turtle rescue. So you'll want to come and see that one. Also, Thursday night we have Michael Eckers, who is an author and a historian. He's coming at 6:30 in 2 days. So we've got another program right away. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you.